Normally people see me with pastel in my hand, but I am sitting here today with this X-Acto knife with some scratchboard in front of me, and I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. Ann, can you help me?
Of course I can. Here I am. What do you need help with?
Well, first off is how do I not destroy what you're working on?
It takes a little bit of precision, but it's actually a pretty forgiving surface.
Well, why don't we sit down and have a talk about what you do and tell us a little bit about scratchboard, and then you can give us a demonstration.
Okay, sounds good.
Hi, welcome to Auburn Community Television and this episode of Meet the Artist. Meet the Artist is supported by the North Auburn Artists to introduce artists in our local community. Today we are visiting with Ann Ranlett. She works with scratchboard, and it is definitely a unique medium, and I think it's going to be really interesting as we scratch away and see the images come forth. So let's get started. So now the world has been put back in order, and Ann is in her rightful position in front of her work, and she will be the one with the X-Acto knife in her hand as opposed to me. But she has reminded me that she actually knows how to use that knife. So Ann, this is an absolute delight to come and talk with you today because back when I was about 14 years old, learned about how to use scratchboard in my art class in high school. And did a little bit of it in my 20s, but kind of didn't move forward with it. But you have actually started with it, stayed with it, and have brought such a unique touch to it. So Ann, why don't you tell me how you got started with scratchboard?
Well, scratchboard came a little bit later in my artistic career, but I've always been drawing since I was a child. It's almost always been animals. But scratchboard I picked up, I did some like you did in high school and college, and learned that those were not the best surfaces. We did the projects and they were fun, but those surfaces weren't that great. You could scratch once and that was it. You were done.
So were you using something similar to what I was using, which is basically a white chalk, and then we actually painted over it with a black ink?
Pretty much. The ones I used were like a cardstock weight paper that was white underneath with a black layer. Mm-hmm. And you scratch it once, you hit the paper, you're done. There's no fixing it. You can't do anything else. So you had to be so careful, and it was very intimidating to get all the marks in the right place as you went through. But I worked on some of that. I did some that had the colors underneath, and I think in elementary school we put down color crayon and black ink on top and then scratched through the black. So a lot of people are familiar with that, and they try to equate that to what I'm doing, and it's not quite the same, a little different.
So they've gotten a little bit more sophisticated in the materials that you're able to use now.
Right, exactly. The boards that we're using now are actually, they're archival. There's a hardboard backing, there's a white clay layer, and then a black layer on top. So that's what we're using now, and it's actually very forgiving in that it's, as long as you're careful with your scratch and you don't really gouge the board, you can come back and rework it. If you make a mistake, you can fix it. But we try not to make mistakes, as that adds more time to the project, but I actually use that ability to scratch and re-ink and scratch and re-ink to my advantage. It's because the boards have that nice depth to them.
So now when you were starting out with this, did you take some courses or training, or did you just develop this technique yourself?
Mostly self-taught. I did take some classes in college, and we used the not so great board,
Yes.
the cardboard basically. And then I still liked scratchboard. I'd done some of it. I did a lot of pen and ink, so that was kind of a natural shift over because you're working and getting values with black and white. And then when I really discovered the good scratchboards, I took a workshop at an illustrators conference back in the late 90s, I think it was. And she was using a slightly different board than what we have now, but a really good quality in that you could add and subtract to it. So that literally was a light bulb moment. I just went, oh, this is good. And it worked very well for pen and ink techniques as well.
So it's actually you're working in the negatives when you're doing this.
Exactly. So instead of putting black on white as you would pencil on paper or ink on paper, I'm putting white on black. So my tool is a knife, so I'm drawing white. I'm drawing white with my knife.
And when you're also doing this, you're using that X-Acto knife, if you want to hold it up, is a very sharp edge. So that's how you get the very fine line within this that you're working on.
Exactly.
Now what about the areas that have a little bit more expanse to the white areas?
It's a matter of spacing the way I put the strokes down. So an area that's got some value to it but not bright white, I'll make smaller marks or I'll space them further apart. so that the eye sees it as a gray when it really is just white marks, but they're spaced further apart. Same as you would do with pencil on paper, perhaps, or ink on paper. You're stippling or drawing lines, but your spacing is different, so you get a different value.
And I'm so impressed that this is what you've kind of developed over time, as you've worked with this particular medium.
I love it. I have a degree in biology. I'm a science nerd, a bio nerd. I love animals. I could not have found a better medium because I love detail. I love to look at my subjects and understand how they're put together. And then the challenge of rendering shape and contour with values is really, really fun for me.
Now, one of the things I also find unique about your work is the introduction of the color in it. So how do you go about doing that?
Color, if a color is added to a drawing, it really just depends on the subject. Some will get full color, others get maybe a little bit of color, maybe just the eyes. Some may get a wash of gray, where I'll take ink and water it down to make it gray. I don't like full color, and I don't know how to explain that. I guess I try to finish the drawing as a black and white drawing, and then I will add color, so that just brings it up a little bit more. And if I'm doing that, I may not do as much work to get the values in black and white because I know the color will help finish it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, and so some will get, like I said, some get full color, some just stay black and white. Depends on the subject.
So are you basically using watercolor then? Is that what you're coming in with?
Yeah, either watercolor or colored inks. It has to be transparent, or else you just obliterate all the scratches. If you put something on like acrylic that isn't thin, you're just getting this plastic layer and you lose all the black values underneath. Anything opaque doesn't work very well. So it's got to be transparent. But inks work fine in watercolor. Kind of depends on what I have handy at the moment or what colors I want. Sometimes the inks are a little bit darker. Watercolor is a little bit lighter, and I'll just add multiple layers to get the value that I want.
So how did you start using watercolor or the inks to do that color? Was that just something, oh, let's see what I can try to add that color?
Some of that came from when I discovered a whole group of people on a wet canvas scratchboard forum online. That was another one of those great moments where I went, oh, look at all the things they're doing with it. And I had done pretty much just black and white until I discovered that group. And then I think someone in there there were various works in progress shared of how people do the work. And they were using color. Okay, so this board takes color really well. The boards I used in the workshop that I took weren't really great with color, but these take color very well.
What do you think is unique about these boards that allows them to do that?
That hard surface, I mean, they're nice and hard, so if you put water on it, it's not going to buckle. The other boards we've been using had more of a matte board backing and then the clay. And those had to go under glass because they weren't supported by this hard backing. So this just takes color better. And you don't get the warpage that you get on a matte board type surface.
Now when you're starting out, do you draw the image kind of basically on the scratchboard before, or are you just free hand doing the work as you're going?
Right, very few of the scratchboards I know freehand because it is such a detailed process. We will actually take, and I don't have a piece with me, but there's a transfer paper that's white. If you're working on a blackboard, there's a white transfer paper. So I will take my photo, crop it, size it, whatever I want to do with it, and the boards come pre-cut to all kinds of sizes. So then I will take this transfer paper and put it between the photograph and the board, and that's what these white lines are here in the middle that you can see. I haven't done any work there, but that gives me my roadmap, and then from there I'll do the scratching and the process. And I will make adjustments as I go along based on the references, but that at least gives me the roadmap to start with.
And I noticed that the one that you're working with, that you have a black and white photo as well as a color. And what are you getting from having that both in color and black and white as you're working? The
black and white helps me with my values so that I'm getting the gray tones that I want. The color will help in that I may not know what I'm looking at. You know, is this shadow down here, is it part of the dog? Or is it the railing behind him? Or is it just stuff in the background that I don't want? Sometimes it's not obvious. And this one I actually cropped out the background in Photoshop. But having the color helps me see what exactly some of the parts are that aren't as obvious in the gray version.
I too work from photographs, and there are times when I have a magnifying glass trying to figure out what exactly is going on in this little corner over here. Because it does help to know what you're drawing. Sometimes I also just think, just trust what you think you're seeing.
Absolutely. And at some point, the photos go away, and I look at the drawing and go, what tweaks do I need to make on the drawing? And I'll
Exactly.
reference the photos again. When I come back to where I need color, of course, then I'll reference the photo. But yeah, at some point you have to go, I'm looking at this as a standalone piece, and what does it need or doesn't need?
So you're going to give us a demonstration, which I
Mhm.
assume is going to be this. But before we do that, I do want to talk about some of your pieces that you've
Okay,
done.
great.
You've already mentioned that you do love animals, and we see a lot of animals in your work. So what would you like to talk about first?
Well, I have some pieces here, various animals. It is sort of dog heavy on the wall right now because I do a lot of dog art. I think that appeals to a lot of people. I do commission work as well. Some of this is just results of photos I've taken for other purposes that I thought would make a good drawing. This particular one is a commission I'm working on. Then I've got this one. This one's just a piece in progress of border collie with a tennis ball. Yeah,
show.
I'll have a photo of it. And it's one I'm doing just for me. This is the kind of thing that gets put away for a year, comes back out, gets worked on a little bit, gets put away. Now it's at the point where I'm close to finishing and I'll go ahead and finish it. For show entries or just for sale, whatever I need to do with it.
When you start working with these, is there a certain part that you find that attracts you to start with first?
Generally not. This one I do have the eyes in, but I don't always do the eyes. I tend to work from the outside in because as my hand drags across, then I'm not losing my transfer lines. And that's just a mechanical reason. But then I'll work on the light parts, maybe the dark parts. It's sort of whatever I feel like working on at that moment. I may get tired of one area, scratching a lot of the same values, so I'll just switch to somewhere else. Or I'll get out another drawing and work on that for a while.
I'll notice too that you have, with this one as well, you have the color drawing that you have there for reference as well. Yeah, it's just amazing. And then when I look at where you start with and then the progress, it's just, it's because I'm medium that I really love.
Well, I love it. I mean, it's just, like I said, it's a great medium for me. I love the detail. I love what the subjects can look like with this amount of detail.
Now, one of the ones that I know that people see this particular scratchboard piece and think it's actually a photograph. And this is called these are just the
Those are the photos.
photos that you worked from. Do we have the actual
Ended up
piece?
over here somewhere. Oh, there we go. And I just finished this piece, so I haven't sprayed it, so it is under plastic. So I apologize if there are reflections. I'll try and open it up. It is a scratchboard drawing. Chrome is a really fun subject to do. It's obviously much different than fur, and there are a lot of bright, harsh whites that I'm not as worried about being careful with how I scratch those. I want the edges in there, and I do a lot of stippling, which is a process. If you've ever worked in pen and ink, you've done stippling where you take your pen and you make dots all on your paper. I do sort of a reverse stippling, and then I can scratch away and come back with a technical pen and put ink back on to break up the harsh scratching. Then I can scratch a little bit more, and so it's very much a layering process to get these values of gray without actual lines being visible.
What is amazing about this is you actually have the shine. And I think that's why when people see it, they think this must be a photograph. You've
Right.
achieved that in that piece, this piece.
I've had people ask, well, how do you paint silver on it?
Yes.
It's just, what it is getting, and you know this, it's getting the right shapes. If you turn a painting or a pastel painting upside down, it doesn't look like the subject, but you see all the shapes. And the same thing here. If I get all of these little reflections in there, it's a virtual city in there that is reflected in this dog. If those are put in there in the right place, it looks like chrome. So it's really just getting the shapes in the right places. And making judgment calls. There's so much detail in this part of his face. I couldn't possibly scratch that in. In a larger scale drawing, I could, but I figure out what is just enough to make it work and look like chrome.
Well, I think that's the thing I find amazing too, because you are working very, very small. And I've done pieces that are smaller, but I do tend to like to go a little bit bigger, at least be something about 13 by 17 is my favorite size to be working. And part of it is exactly that, because you can get in and do a little bit more finer work. But boy, you are right in there in a very, very tight space.
Well, and again, that's the point of the knife, or even these technical pens have a very small point. So I can come in and put pretty fine dots on the drawing if I'm re-inking an area.
Now, this is ink.
This has ink in it.
I see. And so this is where you're saying that you can go in and you can do...
I don't know, it may be cloth. No, it's actually working. So I will come back in with a pen
I see.
and knock back maybe some of the linear looking scratches on something like this dog. It may be overly scratched right now, but I can come back with black and make some of the blacker areas, add them back in. I want this a little bit lighter than the finished piece because that white is what takes color. So I'll paint color on top of that, and that will knock this all back.
So this
where
one's,
it's got-
so when you're working on it, as you're working, do you kind of get in your head, okay, I know what color I'm ultimately going to be using in that?
Generally, and this is a case where there's a lot of yellow in this dog because he's dirty. It will not be yellow on the drawing, and the tennis ball will be that bright tennis ball green.
Yeah.
That's part of why this piece needs the color. I've got
I
to put that
see.
tennis
Oh,
ball,
yes.
and having just one bright green tennis ball would look odd. So
Yes.
I'll put, but it'll just be washes of kind of a purplish gray on the dog's back,
And
and the tennis ball.
We do have an example of where you have used that color, and it's with your tiger.
I will keep that. This is a print, so the original has sold, but I make my prints on metal. So it may have, it's probably got a shine too, but you can see. And so yeah, this is one where I put full color on the tiger. But at some point, maybe it was 90% finished, it was a black and white drawing. And then the color just
And that
brings
just
it up
came
to
back
finish
in.
it.
The eyes are just absolutely amazing, but also what I find so incredible about this particular piece is the coloring that you've done even in various places. It's not just like this is all solid white. You've come in so intricately with
And
it.
some of it too was the amount of scratching. I don't recall. I put maybe a little bit of gray wash in parts of the white part. But most of it was just scratching judiciously so that I left some bits of black that define the contours. If I came in and just scratched that all to white, it would just be a flat white blob. So even though it's a white part on the tiger, I'm scratching and leaving some black in to define the shape and the fur texture and all those parts.
Well, that's absolutely lovely.
Thank you.
Now, I know that you have a piece that we'll be showing to the audience through an overlay but I do want to talk about it. It's one that you did in a collaboration.
Correct.
And it was for the steampunk, I always mess this
It's
up.
the High Hand Steampunk, like Holiday Steampunk Festival. I can get confused too, but they've had it at the High Hand Gallery for a couple of years now, and it's featuring steampunk art. So they have a show that runs for the whole month, and it's usually the first part of December, and then for the weekend they have vendors there. And a friend of mine came out from Indiana. He's visited other scratchboard artists. He's one of our master members of the society, as am I. So he'll travel around, he's kind of a nomad, and visit people and do collaborative works while he's with them. So I told him, you need to get out here. Next time you're coming towards California, get out here. So he did. We did 3 collaborative pieces. One of them that we'll feature was done here with Sean, who you featured on another episode. So Rod and I started it. We did it here at the studio. And Sean was giving us ideas, which we incorporated, and then we finally said, Sean, get in here. We need your hand on this too. So the 3 of us did work on it together, and it's a steampunk giraffe. So you'll see that in a little bit.
Now, Sean does not work in scratchboard.
No.
And he is actually a graphite. So this is really a combination of multi-mediums.
And multi-skills.
Yes.
Because the way my friend Rod works, you can see it right behind me. Soon is another piece we did. He works big and fast and loose. There's none of this tight detail stuff. He just comes in, has an idea, and knocks it out. And that is really different for me. It's different for Sean as well. But I was game. I was like, I want to try this. So we decided ahead of time what images we wanted to draw. And as we hashed that out, then on the day of the project, we just started in. And so we use a whiteboard for these. So it's a whiteboard that can be scratched. So it's basically the same as the blackboards I'm using, but there's no black layer on top. It's all white. Airbrush ink, painted on ink, airbrush, and then scratching tools are not this size. They're big. Fiberglass brushes, steel wool, whatever it takes to remove the ink. And Rod's really good with an airbrush, so he came in and just airbrushed things in. And Sean had some great ideas on things to add and how to change it a little bit. So his composition skills really helped us a lot in working through this thing. So we knocked it out here in about 5 or 6 hours. I went home and did a few things to finish it before I put sealer on it, but we pretty much finished it in one shot, the 3 of us together. It's really fun.
Well, you did mention you put sealer on it. Is that unique that you put sealer on it? Or you typically put sealer on it?
There's 2 ways to frame scratchboard, either under glass or without glass. The concern with glass is if you're shipping to shows and the glass breaks, it's going to scratch your work. The sealer also helps put some UV protection on there for if it is color. If it's just black and white, that clay or the ink is pretty inert. Nothing's going to happen. So I choose to frame without glass. So I do put a couple of good coats of sealer. It's got a UV protecting component, and so far as I know, it works really well. So that's, a lot of us do finished pieces that way.
Well, I like to put an acrylic spray over my pastel works, and it's partly that too. I don't want to run the risk of, through transport, that's sloughing from pastel.
Right.
So we are always trying to figure out a way to protect the work that we spent so much time doing. Well, now you're going to give us a demonstration.
Yes.
And so I will kind of step aside,
Okay.
and you can go about doing this, and we can watch you as this dog materializes before our eyes.
Sounds good.
So Anne, let's see what you're doing there. This is the photo that we had been talking about before, and we showed a little bit of the pictures before. So why don't you start in and show us exactly this technique of
Yeah, so this is a commission I'm doing of a hound dog named Hannah. So I'll be working on her. I've got some parts of it done already, and then I'll just sort of talk as I work through it to explain what the process is that and how I'm scratching. So here we go. Oh, with my glasses. Can't see without the glasses. This little turntable I'm working on is pretty neat, something that my friend Sean discovered exists, because normally I work on my couch with my arm on the edge of the couch, and this is on my lap. When I'm sitting at a table, that doesn't work, so I needed something that could let me turn multiple times as I turn my work as I'm scratching to get the right angle, that had also the right angle for me to work at. So this thing is perfect. It's made for pyrographers, which are wood burning folks, and it's perfect for scratchboard. So I'm going to go ahead and do some scratching now. As we talked about before, I'm using the number 16 X-Acto. I didn't mention the number, but it's a number 16. It's got a little bit more beveled blade that works really well for this. I can get different width scratches with one blade, which I like. So here, working on the ear, I'm careful to look at the directions of the fur. That's what helps make it more realistic. If I just came in and scratched all over the place, it wouldn't have that nice realistic look. It does make some dust as I work, so I either wipe it off or just blow it off. None of this part of the ear is very white or very light, so I'm just scratching softly to not take off too much of the black. And here's a little patch that's a little bit darker on her ear. I'm scratching even a bit lighter there. If I go too light, it's not a big deal. I can come back with the pen and re-ink it. Or if this, in this case, I will be adding color, so the color will also change the brightness there in that spot. And I don't, unless this was a very spotted dog, I would not want to leave big edges between values, but I'm kind of blending it a little bit. Let's see, up here. This part's a little bit brighter right in here. I'm scratching a little bit wider marks, just to bring in that brighter area.
And as I'm watching you, I'm thinking about the great deal of patience this takes.
It does, and some people will call it tedious. That doesn't offend me. It is tedious, but I enjoy it. It's very zen. I love the process. It's neat to be able to create the values with a knife and the scratching, and I actually get very connected to the subject as I work on it, because I spend so much time looking at the shapes and the contours and all of that. So, and it's an animal. My favorite subjects are animals, so it's fun to work on.
Now you're working in a very small area. Do you find that sometimes you have to actually kind of step back and look at it again from a more distant perspective?
Yes, absolutely. You get so head down in it, and I'm so close to it. I will take frequent breaks. The dog might need to go for a walk or whatever. I just need to get up and take a break. So yeah, I do step away from it fairly often. I can't sit and work for hours at a time. My eyes can't handle it, my hand can't handle it. But yeah, you can see it takes a lot of time to make very little progress. But eventually, this will look like an ear.
Now, the one that you're working on right now, he has his head over the railing, and that's an example of where you've already come in and have done the coloring on it?
Yes, thanks for asking. I meant to discuss that. This is a piece where most of my work is animals, so I know I can get the animal right. That's not a problem. But I wanted to make sure that the wood railing was headed the direction that I wanted before I put a lot of time into the dog. And one thing I need to do here, I'm not quite done with the railing. When I am done, then I'll finish these parts where the dog overlaps, because I want that on top of the railing, so I can leave that. I'm happy enough with it now that I've gone ahead and started working on the rest of it. I know that that will work out okay.
If someone wanted to start to learn how to use the scratchboard and the X-O knife, how would you recommend they start out?
Well, we have a couple of forums on Facebook. So if you're on Facebook, there's some great groups that are super helpful to everybody at all levels. And then we also have a scratchboard society that was formed in 2011, I believe, to promote scratchboard as a fine art. And so we have about 200 members, I believe, different levels of skill. You can join just as a friend of scratchboard. And that's a very reasonable number. I think it's $20 a year. And then we have associate members, active members, and signature members, and also master members of the society. And I'm honored to be a master member. There are 17 of us in the world. It is an international society. So I became a master a few years ago.
What was the process of becoming a master?
You have to have the skill, but then as a master, you also have to show a dedication to the scratchboard as an art form. So teaching, being published in magazines, just additional ways that you're promoting scratchboard in your community and wherever that might be. And so that's a big component of becoming a master level. We have a number of signature artists that are very, very talented, but you need to go that extra step to become a master.
Now, do you teach scratchboard yourself?
I do. I teach workshops. I'm kind of revamping my schedule this year. I plan to teach twice a year, a one-day workshop here at the studio. And then I'm trying to do little drop-ins once a month where people that have some scratchboard skill already can just come in and hang out for a couple hours. And it won't be a formal instruction, but they can bring their work and other people bring their work, and we all sort of help each other. I'll get a little work done while I'm doing that, and I've had a few people come so far. So I'm just trying to push that a little bit too. I think it's a fun way without committing to a full workshop.
I think the first time that I saw you and your work, it was probably during an art walk, and you were out in a tent. And you were so wonderful about talking about the process and giving me information if I wanted to order or to get the scratchboard and all of that. You certainly are a great ambassador for scratchboard.
Well, thank you. I love it. Obviously, I love it. It's just a unique medium, and I think those of us that do work in it love to share it because we want people to understand what we're doing, how it's done, and why we love it so much. So I'm glad that you felt that I was helpful to you.
I actually did order some scratchboard.
Did you?
And I did get an X-Acto knife, and I sat there with it in my hand looking at it and going,
what do I do?
Yeah, kind of what I was crying at the beginning.
We'll come to a drop-in one of these days, and we'll walk you through a few more steps. All right, so there's an ear. One thing I can do, this gray kneaded eraser takes away these transfer lines because there will be black marks underneath it, or sort of obscured until I erase them. And then I can come back and, because I don't have any harsh black lines on this dog's ear, but now that I see those, I can come back and just pick away at them, just knock them back.
So how many hours does it usually take to do a scratchboard about this size?
You know, everyone is different. It depends on how much of the board is covered, what types of surface there is. A smooth surface takes more time. Then a furry surface, if I get the fur in there the right way, I'm pretty much done. Of course, there's, things I need to come back and rework, but trying to get something really smooth, like maybe skin, would take more time. At least 10 hours on a board this size. This is a 5x7. Again, but everyone's different.
I really do appreciate the time that you have given us today, and particularly taking the time to show us how you go through this process. And I know other people would love to come by and see your work and maybe watch you work. Where can they see you? How do they get in contact with you?
Well, I have a website. It's scratchboardartbyann.com, all one word run together. I'm often here at the embellishment studio. They could always make an appointment to come visit. But all the contact information is on my website. I've got Instagram, Facebook, all those things out there. So you can go and look at my work as I work on it, examples of my work and things like that. So.
Well,
thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. We have really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
It's always wonderful to visit with artists like Sean and Ann. They bring so much to our communities, and they offer so much in showing us something a little bit different. I want to thank the North Auburn artists for supporting Meet the Artist, and as always, I thank you for tuning in to Auburn Community Television on Wave Channel 20, or possibly finding us on YouTube. Who knows, by watching this program, perhaps you have found the artist just around the corner, or maybe you've discovered the artist within.